I'll call the meeting to order. Mr. Walker, roll call, please.
Musgrave,
Yes.
Kenneman,
Yes.
Delaney.
Here. We have, well, not a quorum. The first order of business, Mr. Walker, did you want to introduce that, sir?
Yeah, that's correct. So this is the night for the Community Development Committee meeting of Wednesday, February the 8th at 6 p.m. After roll call, the first order of business, since this is the first meeting of this committee in a while and with new members on council, would be to select a chairperson. And so nominations would be open from any of the members.
I'd like to make the motion to select Richard Kinnaman as chairperson for the Community Development Committee.
And I will second that. Mr. Walker, roll call, please.
Kenneman,
Yes.
Musgrave,
Yes.
Delaney.
Yes.
Okay.
Motion carries. You want to switch seats?
I don't need to switch seats.
Okay.
We have one item of business, and that is to discuss the future location of the Holly Village offices. And Mr. Walker, you have a presentation then.
Yes, so I provided some brief information for council regarding possible locations. I listed 2 possible locations on the memo that I gave you. I mean, I think there probably is a third, and there is a fourth idea floating around. I'll talk about those briefly. But the first option would be the Holly area schools when they vacate Sherman Middle School on North Holly Road. They have offered a lease arrangement for the village to be a tenant in that space. I've included that lease as well as a short diagram or a small diagram of the proposed area that they would offer. I think that's something that whenever the committee decides if they want to consider that, before any decisions are made, a site tour would be appropriate for that. The second option that is listed in the packet is that of Cyclone Park. And at Cyclone Park, there is really, it's a dilapidated old building there. And really, that park has had a lot of use over the years. It's been many things. It's been the site of the Holly Volunteer Ambulance headquarters. It's been the site of the Holly Police Department. It has been the site of prior village offices. And at one time, NACFA was conducting fire operations out of that building too. So it's had a lot of use there. As I said, it's located in Cyclone Park. Cyclone Park at this time is an underutilized park in our opinion, so I think that that is an option. I would suggest before making any decisions on that site though, that a site visit is conducted there. And so really, if the committee wanted, we could arrange a site visit, all site visits on the same day. A third option, and this is one that has been discussed, but I didn't have enough information to put it down on paper, would be studying the feasibility of maybe combining with the township in a joint municipal building. That's something that we haven't done a lot of homework on, and really I thought we'd wait until the committee dug their teeth into this issue to decide what to do with that issue. And then really a third option, and really Buster Weinbrenner coincidentally brought it forward just after Brian Clausen, our utilities director, mentioned it, is years ago there was discussion of building on municipal offices onto the existing police department in the form of an addition. As it sits right now, that's a very tight site, and without additional land acquisition, I don't think it would be possible. But I would say that probably is a fourth option, even though it may not be feasible to do it. So those would be the options that I would lay forth to the committee, unless you have any additional ideas. Like I said, you have the information from the schools. I don't know if it's appropriate to get into it at this meeting. I think maybe there might be some preliminary items that the committee has to decide as far as protocol and procedure before we start digging into individual locations, but I'll leave that up to you.
Yep. Yeah, what I see probably happening here is, number one, some site visits. And as Mr. Walker said, we could probably do both of those in one day, tour the school and then tour the cyclone, pretty much close to the same time. I don't think we would be going to the school during a school day, so it would be at least 3 or 4 o'clock probably in the afternoon, which hopefully would work better for everyone. And we could leave that up to administration to secure a visit to plan that for us. And then I see us probably coming, I think we should have a couple of meetings. We have, at this point, we have 4 ideas. Through the process, we may come up with a couple others. I would see at least one meeting down the road being more of a public forum meeting, or the term's missing me. Kind of a open house kind of something, or
Town hall.
a town hall type of something to get public input on that. Committee meetings themselves generally do not have public input, but I think if we had one specifically that was designed for that purpose, I think would be beneficial. And then after that, kind of a recompiling of some things and probably a final meeting to come up with thoughts and recommendations. Any questions for Mr. Walker at this point? Or anything there?
No questions for Mr. Walker at this point, although, Mr. Chairman, I think there probably are a couple of members of the public who would wish to comment, kind of to your comment just a moment ago, and we've talked about this before, even though it's not a strict requirement to offer public comment during these committee meetings. I think it might be a helpful thing for us in our work if we allowed that this evening and going into the future.
When we don't really have anything yet, I would really prefer to see that wait until a time when we actually have something that we are presenting or talking about. I feel like this one is more of a let's work on a procedure process, or a process, and then when we really start looking at some other things, to request some input, I think at that point. Unless somebody specifically has another option that we are looking at, like a 5th choice, at this point, it's wait until we really are discussing any of those options. What I think would be, do you have a 5th option?
I just have a question that kind of relates to the whole thing.
Okay, come to the microphone then. I'll let you come up and you'll need to state your name and address.
Diane Bibb, 105 Baird Street. When you're looking at a building, would it also be like enough to incorporate like the DPW? I don't know if they rent their space, but can you bring everything together in one spot if you were looking for a space? And that was all I was
Okay.
saying.
Yeah, I think DPW, we own that property already, where all of their offices are. I think they're the only one, the fire is in their own building. We couldn't relocate those, I think. It is a good question.
I think it's premature at this point.
Yeah,
Just something to think about.
right, yeah. I think the concept of further development at the police department location would be similar to that idea. I'm not sure that any of our other entities would be able to really combine there, unless we were buying property next to DPW and expanding over there. But I don't think any of that's up for sale. So if you want to comment, go ahead. I guess we're doing comments.
Buster Weinberger, 409 North Street. I think one thing when you're looking in the first one out at Sherman Middle School out there, I think possibly look at the distance that the people have, even a senior citizen that have to walk in that long ramp up there to Sherman Middle School, and also the location where it's at. It's not centralized, for a lot of people, even for our senior citizens that come to the meetings and have to go out for other business and that. We should look at that.
Yeah, and I think that's part of some of what we will be evaluating when we do a tour, is what the layout looks like there. I know I have been in that building a lot, and so I know the layout of it, and I also have recommendations if that were a choice on some things that should be considered. But yeah, I do know that is one of the challenges with that building, is the proximity of entrance to even this pod, as it's called, which is really the closest pod to the doors even. So that's, I do agree that that's a thing to be considering. Yes. And as we, just a second before I have you come up, because he brought up that building, I do want it noted that I do also work for the schools, and will be managing a portion of that building, but not this portion. That would not fall under my oversight. The current office is here. I manage the building here, and I do not have oversight of the village offices here. Occasionally they will refer to me to talk to somebody about, heat or air conditioning or something, but otherwise, I do not have a personal gain in that location. So that, I think that's important that it is noted, that there is that.
There's no conflict of
There
interest
is no
there.
conflict that I perceive anyhow. So that it's publicly noted. Anna, you wanted to state something.
Anna Matson, 15091 Western Valley. I'm sure you guys probably know what I'm going to talk about. I'm very adamant about a community center, and the township already has a farmstead plan that's kind of been dormant for many years, where they want to move their office to open up space in our downtown. I always make the point, when we first moved here, and still up until recently, I still had no idea the difference between the village and the township and which one I lived in. And I know many citizens are the same, so it'd be very nice if they were just next door to each other or in the same building, so you guys can say, hey, just go over there, they can answer your question. And obviously, as many things we can incorporate, that frees up retail space in the village, which is a very hot commodity and not much of. So even if we could combine the library or the police station, anything we can, that frees up buildings in the village. So I do know this township owns the land on the north end. It's just outside the village, but it's very close to the village. And I asked Jerry, and he said it's okay if it's just close to the village if the office is there. So what I would propose to, there's many things that would have to work at once. The Holly trolley would have to be a thing. So obviously, like if we could have a trolley that just goes up and down the village to pick people up and drop them off anywhere. And I was even thinking maybe it like an ATM type system for people to pay their water bills in downtown somewhere would be really nice, so they don't necessarily have to come if it is on the north end. So yeah, all things to consider. I've worked really hard to get a lot of grant funding, and I have a lot of emails and calls out and everything to get this project rolling. So I just think the community really needs a community center, and if we can just wrap all of this into one thing, then I really think it's going to be the most cost effective for everybody and give the community what they need and want at the same time. Thank you.
Go ahead, Patrick.
Pat Beanie, 210 Franklin. I just want to stress that it would be real helpful and clear up a lot of talk if when you're doing, when you finally come up with a proposal, that we get some costs, both sides, and make it clear to people what the costs are. The only thing I would add is that I do think the main decision you have to make is, do you want to be in control of your offices, and going to the future, or be in the same situation? I mean, not to start anything with school, but the school district has a different agenda than obviously the village. And that's a prime piece of property. And you could see, I don't know how long the lease would be for, but I could see not too far in the future, looking for another place to be, because that property, I can see and being a taxpayer to the school district, I would most certainly want them to get the most they could out of that property. So it's kind of always catch-22. So I'd like to see probably, make that a very big consideration, how much control you want over your own property and offices. Thank you.
Just by the way, then it's a 10-year lease that's
Yeah.
being proposed
Mhm.
from 2025 to
A
2035.
10-year lease with a 90-day notice for dissolution.
Right.
Yeah. Mr. Cullis, I didn't know if you would want to speak about any considerations or thoughts on a joint project or any things that you've thought about.
Yeah, go right ahead.
George Cullis, 601 East Maple Street. So we just closed the township offices at 6 o'clock and I came right over. That's why I was here late. So I've had a couple of conversations with Jerry Walker, the village manager, about an opportunity to put the two municipalities together, the township and the village, as the one, as Anna said, we often get people in the township office and we have to send them to the village. The village gets people and they have to send them to the township. We've even had a couple of instances where they were at the village, sent them to the township, and then we had to send them back to the village.
Mhm.
Because depending on what they're doing, they sometimes have to deal with both entities, especially if it has to do with water and our new homes. That being said, I'm a little close to the vest with what I'm working on right now, but I am looking at some property that would allow us to have a municipal site available. I can't go into much detail on it right now, but we're looking at something that would allow us to have a municipal complex. As somebody said, one of the issues is it necessarily wouldn't be inside the village limits. But if you start thinking about distance for the people on the north end of town in relationship to how far is Carl Richter, then it's probably the same thing in reverse going the other way. That being said, I have long felt and wrote an editorial article probably over 10 years ago that was in the paper. And at that time I said Holly taxpayers need to take inventory of what we had in the way of buildings and space and what space was needed. And if we could find something where the library could be a part of that facility and include space for community center, I think that's a win for everybody. I think now is the opportunity with everybody needing to make a move. We don't have the room in the current township office that we need. Realistically, we need to hire 2 more people and we have nowhere to put them. And I think going forward, whatever we create could very well serve this community for the next 50 years. The township hall used to have the village and the township in it together back in the 1980s, I think, when they finally separated. So it's certainly something worth looking at.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, I can't give you much detail because it's in the early stages, but
I attended the township meeting where you had a presentation by a planner on what you needed, what the township needed for a building.
Yes.
Could you speak to that process a little bit?
So the current township office is about 4,000 square feet. What we did was we hired an architectural firm that came in and took an inventory of what we needed, both for records, for offices, for meeting rooms for the public. A new township office would probably be in the neighborhood of about 8,000 square feet. I know Patrick said we need to know about numbers, and I don't disagree with him, we do. Unfortunately, we're not far enough along yet to be looking at those. We're in the process of completing our audits at the township and getting into that position. But that's the kind of space that would be there. But that space includes conference rooms, it includes a meeting room, it includes space to do those things. And it's got space for future use, because the last thing you want to do is build a building that suits your needs today. Because Holly Township has about 1,000 homes in its immediate future that are in the cycle, in the planning stages. That's going to take the population from just over 12,000 to somewhere between 15 and 18,000 with those developments. And I think it's realistic to look at a building that will facilitate that space going forward. Obviously, if it became a joint venture, we would have to do the same thing with the village to determine what kind of space they have. But with everybody in the position of needing to make a move, now's the time to do that.
That's possibly something that Mr. Walker might be valuable for us to consider as well, is an assessment of what we really need. Is 7,000 square feet in a pod at the middle school sufficient? Is it adaptable? Is there space at Cyclone to build what we feel we really need? All of those kind of components, and that process, excuse me, I would think could also be valuable to us as we're going through this, to say, what do we really need, and what's going to best benefit, or fit that need the best. So I don't know if that might be something we would make a request to council to add to the agenda, maybe to budget something like that.
So I think probably the best approach is I can go ahead and start getting estimates of what that type of study would cost, and then I can put it on a future council agenda, most likely the March agenda,
Okay,
since the February agenda is complete.
sure. As a committee, what do you think about that?
Mr. Chairperson, I have one question of Mr. Cullis.
Oh, sure. Yeah, we probably have more questions for you, George.
If we were to combine both the village and the township in one building, how is that going to affect one or the other? I've heard chatter of wanting to dissolve the village and only have the township as the government entity. Is that possibly
We've
something
not
down the
had
road?
We've not had those conversations, but I will tell you, when I first came into office, Jerry and I and Dave Noose traveled to South Lyon. South Lyon did a situation where they combined, Jerry, was that the city?
Yes.
The city and the school district. School district had an old building, but they didn't have money to retrofit the building. So they worked out a deal there, and I have some of that information in my office. I have the whole package, as a matter of fact. But they worked out a deal where in this particular case, we're talking two entities in one building. And in their arrangement, the city took over the building. They put forth the money to build it out, turned around and gave the long-term lease to the schools, which covered their portion of the expense. And they basically, Jerry, correct me if I'm wrong, they condoed it out.
That's my favorite thing to do, by the way, but yes.
Okay. So they, I think at that time the schools had like 40%. The city had 60% of the building. They had a common area in the middle for their meetings. And then a few years later, the schools realized they needed more space, so they added on. But it was a mutual agreement that was worked out as to how they oversaw the building and so forth. As to the chatter of one entity taking the other, I think that chatter's been going on long before I was even in this town.
Pull the microphone up a little bit. Oh, that works too.
Okay.
I just don't want to see the village moving into one spot along with the township and then the village be dissolved.
Well,
As far
those are
as-
two separate topics. I think in respect to the two moving in, that would be a separate agreement regarding the building and the properties. Some kind of a shared agreement. As to the other one, that's a whole another bag of.
Well, I do have to say, though, Mr. Collis, I do agree with Ms. Musgrave, and thank you for that question. I think they are, or could be connected. I mean, it's, they're not two totally separate and distinct things, right?
No, and I think as the two bodies work together, my goal is always what will serve the taxpayers of this community in the best sense. I just don't want to confuse the issue by trying to mix them, because they're both big enough. I think you could work on one issue of getting everybody in one building at one time. You could also look at the other side of it. They're two separate conversations. And I think if you try to put them all in at once, it's going to create a lot of confusion. But it's
Yep.
not that I'm never
I
opposed
think
to
I-
having a
yeah.
conversation.
I think I understand that it feels like there could be overlap in that process. But I think process-wise, they are very distinct, as Mr. Cullis is talking. Selecting a building, whether it's building something, moving into something, redeveloping something, is something we handle within our governing structure. Another form of government is a whole ballot proposal process that is done completely different and separate.
And keep in mind too, if we're going to look at the possible merging of municipalities into one complex, then you need to start with stakeholder meetings, because you've got the village, you've got the township, the library board is separate. Remember, they're a separately elected board. If they wanted to be a part of that project, if we're looking at how do we serve the community as a whole, I mean, you have that example sitting right in Springfield. You have the township, you have the library, it's all in one.
Well, I think certainly what I'm saying, and I think what Ms. Musgrave is saying as well, if I may, is maybe we should say they are distinct issues, but they're not separate. To say that they're, totally just not connected at all is a little bit like saying, I got my eggs, I got my bacon, I got my orange juice, I got my coffee, I got my toast, but I'm not making breakfast. Like those are all like separate components, but it's like, yeah, if you're getting all those things together,
Yeah.
you're you're putting things together to make breakfast, right? And I think that sort of
But at the same
kind of
time, you can have two
the-
entities in one building without having to merge. That's what I meant by separate.
sure.
They're
And-
separate
and-
buildings.
Really, if you're building a building that is designed for two separate entities, you're building a lot bigger building than if you've merged entities. So, you know, at this point, we aren't approaching that.
A fair point. Yeah.
With your analogy, it's almost like deciding if we're eating breakfast or lunch. And at this point, we're only eating breakfast. You know,
I just wanted to
yeah,
determine
yeah,
what the motive, I mean, I
Right.
understand
Yeah.
totally of, you know, having two, for the convenience of our taxpayers, having two people in the same building. I get that.
yes,
I just want to make sure that it's not
right,
a ploy that
yeah,
separates or, you
right,
know, creates one entity
Sure.
Right.
instead
Yeah.
of two.
yes,
Yeah.
That was basically my question.
Yeah.
yeah,
So.
yeah.
But at this point, it's premature too, because we're still looking into things.
Right, we're looking at, and
Yeah.
as was brought up, you know, if we are looking at a multi-entity building that may include the library or any other something, you know, are we thinking, you know, if we start thinking combined in one facility, do we relocate the police department to there? Do we include the library? Do we have the township and the village? And, you know, how we look at all of that. And that's only one of the options, again, but that does turn it into a bigger process or discussion. And, it, you know, to be thinking about that as we go through that, too.
My personal opinion is that we need to decide what, first of all, where do we want to have it? Do we want it within the village limits? Do we want to have it on the north end of town? Looking at what's available other than what's posted here,
Mm-hmm.
and then go from there and see, okay, what is the feasibility of combining everything into this or having separate locations?
Right,
Just like the fire department, you know, with the fact that they're right there in the middle of town now, it's more feasible for them to be there to, you know, to get to
right,
either end of town.
Right.
right.
So we need
Right.
to look at every part of the puzzle
Right.
and see what should be
Yeah.
or where they should be.
Yeah,
So, right.
yeah. And I think as we look at all of that, I think that will help everyone understand that this isn't going to be like 2 meetings and we're done.
No.
You know, this will take us a while. So, you know, that's just something to keep in mind, you know. Is it, you know, I know we have 2 years, but we're not going to spend that long. But, you know that we could easily, you know, have half a dozen meetings on this, looking at different things. And also including that public forum meeting as well. Once we've maybe even just fleshed out what the options really are, and then have a presentation on each of those options, and that is the time to have public input to give us your feelings or thoughts or questions on each of those options that are developed, and then we come back and we have more serious, let's narrow our list down, let's kind of thing, you know?
You know, Mr. Chairman, that comment gives me a thought here that I wonder if the committee would consider. we've talked about cost, we've talked about location, we've talked about space, we've talked about a number of factors that would
Right.
guide that decision. I almost wonder if, a good way of proceeding would be for us to specify in writing what exactly those factors are. And then when we have that, those presentations on the options that we have,
Right.
we can look at pluses and minuses in each of those categories.
Right.
What would we think about that?
So,
Feasible.
yeah, I think that's kind of what we're looking at having worked up
Yeah.
and ready for the public presentation on that and input would be to have all of that. And are those the main things that we are looking at this point that we are considering or that we need to be considering? Are there other areas that we need to be considering in that process too? Do you have any
Sure.
other thoughts of other options or categories?
Personally, right now, I think we should do the tours
Okay.
first.
Mhm.
See what is there, see if it's even remotely something that we could use or utilize for what we need for our, looking at our needs, possibly the villages or the township's needs, and go from there.
Right.
We may find that some of these on here are not even worth looking at
Mhm.
because they don't fulfill our needs.
Yeah,
Either way, either
Yeah.
singularly or combined, so.
yeah. Tours, I think, are good. And then I feel like our next step as well is to have some form of needs assessment done.
Agree.
And until we have both of those, I think we're kind of, we don't have anything to come back to yet. So if we can throw that on the March agenda, or request that to be added to the March agenda for the council, and have Mr. Walker do some research on costs for that, would be good. And then also do our tours.
Will that give Mr. Walker enough time to pull quotes and costs for the March agenda for the council?
So the first step would be to get just a short RFP developed, just to get the cost. Certainly, there won't be enough time for those studies to take place and have that ready for March,
Right.
but definitely for council to authorize, because it will be a budget amendment,
Right.
to authorize the funds in order to then hire a company.
Right, yeah. And then it's probably a month or so after that that
At least.
they would evaluate it. So, do we want to make a motion to recommend to council a proposal for needs study?
Yeah, so all I will need is just to gain authorization to do a budget amendment in order to conduct a needs assessment. And I can take care of that with or without a motion.
I'll make the motion anyhow, so that we give you a little something formal from us,
I'll
Yeah.
support.
okay? It's a simple thing. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, motion carries. Any other things you think we need to consider at this time? Other than, well, we'll wait for Mr. Walker to secure a date with the schools for
So
a tour.
I would just say, if I can get 2 dates from the committee, dates and times, then I can take that to the school and see which one is
Okay.
available.
We're talking March.
I mean, I think we can still do it in February if you'd like, whatever works best for a committee. Just as Mr. Kinnaman said, it would have to be after 3 o'clock.
Yep. And next week is pretty much out for me.
Me too.
It's a very packed week.
The week of the 20th is relatively open for me, I think, except on Thursday.
They are closed on the 20th, that's President's Day.
Yep, 20th
Oh, right,
and
yep, yep.
21st are both,
Oh,
they have a
But when-
PD day, they have a PD day
The
on the
22nd.
21st.
24th, I am not available.
oh.
21st or 23rd, I'm available.
Okay, well, they're not open on the 21st. Well,
Okay.
we,
Hmm.
yeah, they have teachers in there for PD, though.
But if we're just
Well-
touring, we don't want people in there anyways, right?
No.
We don't want to.
No, it would still be a later in the day, anyhow, so
Yeah, they would
PD
be done,
over.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
So, all right, 21st or 23rd?
If it's the 21st, it would have to be after 4 o'clock for me.
That would work for me.
Me too.
Okay.
I get off work at 3.
And the 22nd is open
No. Wait.
for you?
It's open for me, yeah.
22nd, yeah, 22nd and 23rd are
Okay.
open for me after 3:30 PM.
Okay, so either day, the 21st or 22nd, 4
Mhm.
o'clock,
Yeah. Yep.
could work.
Okay, I will try and secure a date and then
Thank you.
let the committee know.
I'm 10 seconds behind, but 20 seconds behind.
Pardon me?
I said I'm 10 seconds behind when I'm watching, but 20 seconds behind.
So we will not be utilizing this room. It'll just be for site visits at
Yeah.
Sherman Middle and Cyclone Park.
Yep. For the committee to do site tours. Okay? If we have nothing else, okay? And at that time, we will determine if we need a meeting then in March, or if we will wait until we start getting some assessment, needs assessment done, and then meet again.
Sounds good.
Sounds good?
Sounds
Okay?
good.
Very good.
Then at 6:43, I will adjourn the meeting. Very good.
Thank you.
Mhm.